Coach Bob Starkey. Welcome to the Victory Degree Podcast.
Absolutely excited to be here, Nick. I've heard a lot about it, and I think I'm going to enjoy chopping it up with you here for a little bit.
Fantastic. So let's get right into it. What does the name Alan Osborne mean to you?
Alan Osborne was my junior high coach in West Virginia. My father worked 3 jobs, and my father left me a great example of working hard and being unselfish, doing things for your family, but he was obviously gone quite a bit. And Alan kind of filled that void. He was an excellent teacher. He was a Bob Knight disciple and outstanding basketball coach. But he was outstanding beyond the X's and O's. He invested in me at a very young age. And watching him, he's somebody that I wanted to become. And, I talk to people all the time. People get excited because I coach at Louisiana State University. And I remember one time spending a couple of days with John Wooden, and he talked about the best coaches around are high school coaches. And I would add junior high coaches. Junior high coaches specifically get kids at a very early developmental stage. As a college coach, I can tell what type of coaching our freshmen have had literally in the first 2 or 3 weeks. And Alan gave me a good base as a person, and that relationship developed over the years to the point where when I turned 31 and got married, Alan stood beside me. And as we've gone through the years, Alan was literally a junior high coach for 2 or 3 years, then became the head basketball coach at Polka High School, where he's been the last 40 years. He's one of the winningest high school coaches in the state of West Virginia. But there's not a time where I don't make a big decision. I don't talk to Alan. We talk quite a bit, and it's amazing how that relationship started at the junior high level, and he's been one of my mentors ever since.
You mentioned high school coaches. You yourself, your coaching career started in high school at Winfield High School, I believe, in West Virginia. So I'm curious, if we go all the way back to those days and coaching high school, what was the inspiration for getting into coaching?
Well, you just mentioned it was Alan Osborne. Feeling the impact he had on me. I wanted to be that kind of guy. Then I go to school at Marshall University, and the head men's basketball coach there at the time was the late Stu Aberdeen. And he taught a basketball coaching class, Basketball 101 and Basketball 201. Well, Basketball 101, he never mentioned X's and O's. He talked about the coaches from the standpoint of developing young people and how they're involved in communities and how they make life better. And that was the entire course for that particular semester. And so after having played for Allen and then hearing the philosophy of Stu Aberdeen, that's something I wanted to be, and had an opportunity to do that at Winfield. Nick, what was unique at Winfield, in West Virginia in those days, girls basketball played in the fall and the boys played in the winter. So there was about 5, 6, 7 years there where I coached the boys and the girls, and was able to because of the different seasons. And my college career has kind of paralleled that. I've coached on both sides. So those high school roots were very, very important to me.
What was the main, besides maybe the obvious differences, but what were some of the other differences between coaching the girls' side and then the boys' side as well?
Well, the girls were still in the infant stage of learning the game. I remember my very first opportunity to coach as I volunteered at Winfield Middle School. And it was the first year they had ever had a girls' basketball team. And we literally had girls who had never played before. The first week we were teaching the rules of the game. Everything from double dribble to 3 seconds in the lane to getting the ball across half courts. But they were so hungry and eager to learn. And I often get that question now, which did I enjoy more, the men's side or the women's side? And my answer always has been, always will be, I've enjoyed the young people that wanted to learn. And I was blessed to have, on both sides of Winfield, just some unique young people. It's funny, just last week, I got a team picture from an AAU team that I coached 45 years ago. They got together, found the picture, blew it up, and every member on that team had wrote me a letter and talked about how those experiences had helped shape their lives. And, there's no greater reward for a coach than that.
So that was, I guess, along the lines of what I wanted to ask you next is, as a coach, what do you wish for your players? What, in your eyes, what would you say is success to you? Let's say you come home from a practice or from a game or from a tournament and you say, wow, that was successful because this happened.
Well, for me, anytime a team faces adversity and fights through that,
Mm.
because I really think that's a big thing that we do as coaches. That's a life lesson. That's a carryover because we're all going to go through tough times in life. And I think that's one of the things that participating in team sports does. It teaches them to be good teammates and the work ethic and all that, but to be able to handle hard. And it worries me a little bit that some of the things that are going on in our game today, we're getting away from that a little bit. Lute Olson used to had this great line. The great coach at Arizona. Somebody asked him, how does he evaluate a recruiting class? And he said, "We'll come back 20 years after they played for me. I'll tell you what kind of class it was." And for me, when you get pictures of children that your players have had, or a wedding invitation, or they stop by town, they want to go to dinner, those are the things that make a big connect with me. That's how I know that we did something other than teach them how to shoot the basketball.
How do you teach your players to fight through adversity?
Well, the first thing is you have to create a little adversity for them. And I've said this many years. I don't think there's anything more important for developing a team and a player than the structure of your practice. And, Mike Krzyzewski used to call it chaos. He liked to create chaos in practice to teach his kids how to think and how to work through some things. And then I think it's your mindset. I was blessed. My first tour at LSU, the football coach there at the time was a guy named Nick Saban. And he has a great line: never waste a failure. So I think what's important is when an individual or a team faces some adversity, that you take the time to show that individual or that team how that leads to something better. If they have the right mindset, that it's part of the process. It's the failure that helps get you to success. It's the tough times that make you hard and resilient. And so I think it's important with coaches or leaders when you're going through a difficult time that you point out the advantages of working through that.
I want to double click on a word you said: process. And I think that same guy that you just mentioned, Nick Saban, I don't know him, but I'm sure he sounds like he might be a successful coach one day. But he talks a lot about process. And I think you may have quoted him somewhere saying that Nick Saban never looks at the scoreboard, or never instructed his team to look at the scoreboard. I think there's only maybe two guys on his team that I'm blanking on that were ever allowed to look at the scoreboard. And so his whole thing was process. Are we doing the right thing? So can you help me unpack that a little bit? And what does it mean when he says, let's focus on the process?
Well, his whole philosophy was to get players to give 100% concentration on the absolute moment that is going on. He believed that thinking about winning took away the energy and the concentration you need to give on that particular play. And I think to me, it's a little bit more difficult in basketball because the structure of the game, the transition, the conversion, all you have offensive team, a defensive team, a special team. But when he was LSU, he talked about his quarterback obviously had to have access to the scoreboard. He wanted a defensive captain too, but everybody else needed to be concentrating on the play. And his thing was, it didn't matter if it was 1st and 10 or 2nd and 3 or 3rd and 16. It didn't matter if it was the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. It didn't matter if you were up 6, behind 10, up 22. That had absolutely nothing to do with that particular next play. That next play was everything. Kermit Davis used to say, every possession has a life of its own. And that's what the process is about. So if you just concentrate, if you're a lineman and you're supposed to pull out and make a particular type of, that's all you're concentrating on. You're not concentrating on the score. You're not concentrating on what your teammates doing. You're concentrating everything that you can do at that particular moment. I thought it was interesting, the series they did on Michael Jordan not too long ago that we all watched, The Last Dance. There was a very short clip, but it showed Jordan walking through a ton of media on his way to get dressed for a game. And Phil Jackson said it wasn't his shooting, his defense, his jumping ability. The number one characteristic trait that Michael Jordan had was he had the absolute ability to be completely in the moment at every time. And that's a hard thing for young people to understand and to grasp. It's a hard thing for coaches. We're very, very result driven. Saban would say, we're not interested in destination goals. He never talked to his team about going to this bowl game or win this championship. He never had numerical goals in terms of how many games you want to win. By the way, John Wood never mentioned the word winning when he was talking to his team. It was all about the things that go into winning. And when you can of kids to really focus and concentrate on moments, you have an opportunity to get them to execute it at a much higher level. And by the way, I would be remiss if I didn't say that Nick Saban was also in West Virginia.
Had to throw it in there.
Had to. One more thing about Nick. I thought this was interesting. I was on Sue Gunner's staff, and we had a really good basketball team. And Sue had created an outstanding program, but had never gotten to a Final Four. And this particular year, we went to the Elite Eight. Lost to the University of Texas for a chance to go to our school's first ever Final Four. And that off season, we brought Coach Saban in to talk to our team, and he talked about the process. He talked about not worrying about results, not worrying about winning, not worrying about all these numerical and destinational goals, but just concentrate on being the best you can be every single possession. And Coach Saban can certainly do it like 1,000 times better than I can. So the fall rolls around, and Coach Gunner calls in our captain, Temeka Jonson, as she did every year, and said, okay, what I need you to do is to get with your teammates, and you guys need to come upon some goals for this particular team. And I think that's very important. I think a lot of times coaches set goals and they don't involve the players, and you don't have buy-in. When the players are part of that process, it helps with buy-in. So about a week later, Temeka came in and met with our staff, and she said, Coach, we're ready. And like I said, we're coming off an Elite Eight team, and we got just about everybody back. I mean, that was Seimone Augustus and Rodnika, Danica Hodges, Trina. It was just a powerhouse team. Aisha Smith, just WNBA players. Coach Gunner said, Coach, we just got one goal. I remember I just sucked the air out of me. I thought she was going to say Final Four, National Championship. And she looked at Sue and she said, we want to be the best practice team in America. I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about it now. Now, this is where Sue was different. Sue says, I absolutely love that goal, and that's what we're going to go with. But I need you to go back and talk to your teammates. What does that look like? What does that sound like? How are we going to measure that every day? And she went back, and they came back with some rules of accountability. That team went to the Final Four and started a string of 5 consecutive Final Fours at LSU. And every year, the team goals were intangibles. So the culture changed a lot. With Coach Saban talking to our staff and the team about the virtues of the process.
2 follow-up questions. I will start with the first. You talked about embracing the moment and how for MJ that was his defining characteristic. And I have heard the same thing about Kobe Bryant. Numerous stories. Jamie came on the podcast, talked about Kobe's willingness to embrace the moment. I had George Mumford on the podcast, who worked with Kobe, who's a world-renowned sports psychologist who actually worked with Kobe and MJ. He said that's one thing that he always tried to impart on them is staying in the moment, embracing the moment. I listened to a clip from Steph Curry who talks about finding that flow in a game and staying in the moment and embracing the moment. So I'd venture to say that there is a recurring theme here, and that all the greats seem to have this ability to stay in the moment. And yet you mentioned that for young people, it's difficult. But on the flip side, it seems so important in achieving anything great. So help me understand why it's so difficult and why more people are not trying to find a way to stay in the moment and embrace the moment.
Well, I think there's so many distractions. There's so many things that pull and tug at young people, and there's more now than ever before. With social media and some of the changes, especially in the collegiate game. I'll go one notch better in terms of staying in the moment and understanding the process. It's just not game time. It's also practice. It's your workouts. We have a generation of young people that get bored quickly. A friend of mine, Kevin Eastman, who was assistant coach for Doc Rivers with the Celtics and the Clippers, and is just an absolutely phenomenal person to learn the game of basketball from, told our team, we brought him in to speak to our team, he told the story that for the longest time in the NBA, the rumor was going around that Kobe would go to the gym and work on one particular move for 2, 3, 4 straight hours. So maybe it's a shot fake at the top top of the key, one dribble, pull up, step back, jump shot. He worked on that same move for 2, 3, 4 hours. Now, we're in a generation of kids who won't shoot the same shot more than 2 or 3, 4 straight times. So Kevin runs into Kobe one summer and says, there's this rumor going around that you work on a particular move for 2, 3, 4 straight hours. Is that true? Kobe said, yeah, that's true. And Kevin says, well, what's the form? Is it 2, 3, 4 hours? How long do you work on a move? And Kobe said, until. That was powerful. That was powerful. Kobe's thing was he did not work on a shot till he could make it. He worked on a shot till he couldn't miss it. This is a completely different mindset. And so to me, when you talk about the process, it has to start at practice. And then I think the special players understand the process when there's nobody around them. Then we start talking about self-discipline. Do you have the self-discipline to do the things when nobody's around, detailed at the rate that you need to? Can you hold yourself accountable? And really, truly, that's why, you mentioned Michael, Curry, Kobe. There's not a lot of them because it takes all those areas. It's not just enough to show up and respect the process on game time. Matter of fact, it's more important to respect the process when you're alone or when you're at practice, because that's where the habits that you got the process down when the ball's thrown up on game night.
Second question I had for you that I thought of was this whole concept of culture, and you mentioned it earlier. And I hear this word thrown around with a lot of teams. And one of the best examples is, the Belichick Patriots with Brady. Everybody would say, wow, they have an amazing culture. Belichick knows how to establish a good culture. You look at other teams across the different sports, and there's teams there. Even, I'm a huge 49ers fan. So even now that, that we've had some success in recent years, there's this idea that, hey, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have established this culture that leads to winning. But I never really understood what that word, I understand what it means, but I don't understand the traits that establish a good culture or that make for a good culture. So help me understand from your perspective, when you get down into the details of it, what is actually happening behind the scenes that we as fans see as good culture?
Well, I think there's different types of culture, and because there's different types of coaches. And certain things are going to be more important to one coach than the next coach. But what a culture is having a set of standards that you feel is important and consistently applying them every day. One of my favorite quotes on culture comes from Doc Rivers. You have to fight for your culture every day. You never arrive culture-wise. And by the way, I think a lot of the best cultures are process oriented. If you go to there's a great sign in Clemson's indoor football facility that says your best is the standard. Doesn't say ACC championships, national championship. By the way, one of my favorite stories about Bill Belichick is towards the end of the Brady era, and they're dominating football, and it's at a fall press conference, and some writer gets up and starts reeling off all he's accomplished: 5 Super Bowl championships, this many NFC or AFC championships, you won this many games, this many playoff games. What is the next important accomplishment for you? What's the next big thing that you have to get done? Belichick looked at him without hesitation. He said, I'd like to have a really good practice today. That's the most important thing to me. And he said it, but I promise you he lived it. Coaches with great culture live the culture themselves. Don Meyer, your example's not the main thing, it's the only thing. And then your culture has to be, you don't really know how strong a culture is till things get tough. People use culture when they're talking about teams that are winning at a high level, and without question, culture is part of that. But there's also culture involved when teams have a down season or a down portion of their season to help keep them centered and allows them to more quickly turn the table and get back on the right track. There's intangibles. I think accountability is big in all cultures, and that's from coaches holding players accountable, especially players holding players accountable. Tom Izzo says the best coach teams are player coach teams. And what he's referring to is accountability. I think work ethic's a part of that. I think being a great teammate is a part of that. And I think it's really, really hard sometimes to be a great teammate all the time. One of the things we talk about to our kids is you have to be a great teammate to a teammate who doesn't deserve it at that time. That's the test of a teammate. That's the test of a teammate. So I think those, but there's so many variables. Pete Carroll certainly had a lot more fun and relaxed type culture than say maybe a Belichick. So there's so many different ways to coach this, but I do think there's a few leadership. We're fighting to find leaders now, Nick. It's tough. Kids want to be liked. It's more important than being respected. Well, sometimes you can't be liked all the time if you're holding your teammates accountable, and so it's really hard to find leaders. Another great Nick Saban thing that he taught us at LSU. He made the comment one time to me that in terms of basketball, if your player doesn't have a strong left hand, what do? You get in the gym and you work on it. Well, if they're not a good free throw shooter, what do? Well, you get in the gym and you work on it. Well, if they're not good leaders, what do you do? Well, what most coaches do is they complain we don't have any leaders. Saban had a leadership council that he placed leaders on this council or people that he thought could be leaders. And they met with them on a consistent basis and talked about leadership, what it looked like, how they could be. But he taught leadership. And I really think we need to do a lot more of that today.
What downstream effects does that have, not producing enough leaders, particularly within sports?
Well, you say particularly in sports, but I think it's within life. You look around, and I think we're lacking good leadership. And but leadership is it's kind of like the person who drives the bus. That they're going to make sure the people that are in the right seats are in the right seats. If there's somebody that need to be on the bus, they get them off the bus, and they're going to steer the bus in the right direction. To me, there's two things that are difficult about leadership. The first one is you have to be present. You can't be a leader and be off on your own. You even when there's times where you want to be off to yourself or you need some private, you still have to be available to your team. We're having a hard time understanding that. We have a lot more individuals now than maybe we certainly did. And then the thing that I alluded to earlier is they have to understand that sometimes being a leader means you may not be liked. The most important thing is to be respected.
Coach, I'm wondering as I'm sitting here talking to you, if I could flip this interview and have you sit down with a Belichick or a Saban or insert your favorite coach, what would you want to know from them?
The biggest thing that to me that I love to study is how coaches handle failure. How whether they have a player they have to discipline, whether they lose a ball game they shouldn't have. Tony Bennett, when they got upset in the first round of the NCAA tournament, I think it would have been fascinating to shadow him over the next 6 or 7 months to see how he reprogrammed that team to one that ended up winning the national championship the very next year. That was an accident, players. There had to be some detailed, intentional things that they do when those things happen. Because to me, it's I don't want to say easy, but certainly it's easier to coach teams when things are going well, when you have talent, when they're playing well. But how are you handling the things that cause teams sometimes to, go off the rails? Those are things that I think are fascinating to me.
How much do you think a team's performance is based on the coach and his or her performance? And I ask this because as fans, obviously we want to find someone to blame, and a lot of times it is the coach. If a team underperforms, people will be calling for the coach to be fired, and all the fans will start a debate on whether or not that coach should be fired, and then Twitter goes crazy, and et cetera. But how much of a team's performance is based on the performance of the coach, or should be based on the performance of a coach?
Well, I'm going to give you an answer. It's not going to be very popular with coaches. I think
let's do it.
Especially on my level. Now, I'm talking about my level. I think it always comes to us. If we're not playing well, then there's 3 things going on. The first one is we're not doing the things we need to be doing in practice, the preparation part, whether it's the scout, whether it's the breakdown of drills, whether the structure of our practice. The second part is, are we doing the right thing coaching on game night? We got the right players on the floor at the right time? Are we calling the right plays? Are we making the right adjustments? Now, if we're practicing well and doing those things and we're coaching well and we're still not having success, then we've got to look ourselves in the mirror and ask questions about recruiting. So I think there's a lot of it that falls on the coach's shoulders, and I think we need to shoulder that.
Going back to failure, I know I'm skipping around a little bit, but going back to failure, I kept thinking about it. And in life, we're taught that, listen, if you fail at something, the at least the life advice that I've been given is just keep pushing on and keep pushing through it. Use it as a learning lesson. Try to take out some lessons that you can apply to your next experience so that you don't maybe make the same mistake, but just keep pushing through. I'm curious, just because you talked about failure, what's your advice to your athletes on how to deal with failure?
Well, the first thing, and we alluded to this earlier, the most important thing is we have to learn from it.
Mm.
It just can't be a loss. We have to the great Billy Moore who coached at UCLA and is one of the great coaches in our sport. Used to tell me after a bad game or a season that fell short, you had to perform an autopsy, which means you got to dig in there deep and you have to find the cause. You have to find the cause. And so, and I work for somebody now who's as good as anybody I've been around in Kim Mulkey. And when we don't have a good practice or we don't have a good game, we have honest conversations. First of all, in staff meetings, it starts with us. But then she'll have them with the players and the team, and that doesn't mean we're yelling at them. It may be just, guys, where were you at? What were you thinking during this stretch of the game when we were struggling? How can we get better at it? How can we help you perform better in these areas? So it just takes a lot of in-depth thought. And some of, like I said, a lot, maybe we had the wrong people on the floor at that time. Sometimes a kid can have a failure and it's not their fault. It's because we didn't put them in a situation to succeed, which I think is one of the most important things that coaches do. We have to put people in the right places at the right time to have success. So when there's a failure, I just think there's a lot of pieces to it, and I really think that's Don Meyer used to talk about we need to coach after victory the way we coach after defeat, because after defeat, man, I mean, we're up all night, we're breaking down film, we're having conversations, and then you win 5 or 6 games, and you kind of relax a little bit. But I think this is important. If you're talking about individuals and failure, each individual kid is different, and you have to know what their why is. That's the first thing, is to get on that level of understanding of why playing basketball is important to them. And I think when you can have that understanding, then you can start having conversations about what they need to do to get better. How can they improve? How can they learn from the setback? And I really do. I think it's one of the most important things we do is how we look at loss and defeat and failure.
Speaking of failure, and then also tying in what we discussed earlier with social media and some of the challenges that athletes today face, I want to bring up a particular moment that happened earlier this year with Angel Reese. And this was after your loss to Iowa and Caitlin Clark, which we'll get to that game a little bit as well. But Angel Reese, in her post-game press conference, broke down in tears and said, and I quote, "I just try to stay strong. I've been attacked so many times, death threats. I've been sexualized. I've been threatened. All this has happened since I won the national championship, and I haven't been happy since then." Hearing that from one of your players, what goes on in your mind?
Well, it's obviously disheartening. It's I can't think of the name of the young lady from Iowa, a really, really good player that eliminated all their social media accounts because after they lost in the championship game, the direct messages she got, it's horrible. We have so many miserable people out there in the world that have nothing to do than to be mean, spiteful, and hateful to people that they've never met, they don't know. It's sad and it's scary. And Angel certainly has taken her share. I mean, we went through a season where we traveled with 3 security guards. So the most important thing is that those young people know that you're there for them and that you're behind them, and that they can come to you if there's something that you can do. And then you have to be really aware. I'll give you a great example. If I post something on my social media account about Angel, and I happen to use her hashtag or her social media name, the stuff on the comments on my Instagram page. They just scare the heck out of me. Like if I post something on Angel, I know I got to go on my account every 30 minutes and delete some horrible, vulgar stuff. Um, and it's a lot to ask somebody to be tough. Now, Angel was amazing. I mean, she really showed resilience and toughness her 2 years with some of that went on. But we're asking 19, 20-year-olds to be tough and handle stuff that professional athletes in their mid 20s, early 30s gone through. So it's coming earlier and earlier and earlier. And social media is a big part of this.
I had CJ Watson on the podcast. He was in the NBA for 10 years, played with the Warriors with Steph, played with the Magic, played on a couple different teams. Had a really, played on the Pacers with Paul George. Had a great NBA career, but he mentioned to me in the podcast that during when he was with the Pacers, when they were in the playoffs playing against the Miami Heat, there was a game or two where his shot wasn't falling and he wasn't playing well, and he would come back to the locker room, open up his phone, and on Twitter or Instagram there would be fans sending him death threats because of his performance. And that shocked me because as a fan who watches the game and is passionate about rooting for my teams, I can't in a million years imagine sending a player death threats because of the way that they perform. To your point, the people that are doing that, it's just crazy.
Well, how many times have we seen on the news things that happen actually in arenas with people hollering some horrible stuff or throwing stuff? It's one of the parts of sport in our society that's not very attractive right now. But the concerning part for me is it's filtering down and affecting kids at a younger age before maybe they have a chance to develop toughness and understanding.
Right. What's your advice to recruits? Because on the flip side, they're also on social media, and a lot of times I can at least speak for myself. When I was younger, I didn't necessarily think through all the consequences of, something that I might post on social media or how that might affect me later on in life. So what's your advice to recruits in dealing with social media and just that whole sphere of influence?
Well, at LSU, we actually have somebody that coaches our kids on that. We have somebody that deals with them on how to speak to the media and how to speak in public. And then we have somebody that talks to them about how you can use social media to build your brand, because building your brand has become a big thing in college athletics now because of the NIL. There's been an occasion where Coach Mulkey's told a student athlete, you probably need to take that particular post down for whatever reason. Obviously, as coaches, we all follow all our players on social media, not to spy on them, but to help protect them. And to be honest with you, I'm speaking to LSU. I'm amazed at how well our kids are on social media. They have an understanding of how to present themselves, the program, and values that are important to them. I mean, we've got a lot of kids that have done an amazing job building their brand. But it goes back to what we talked about with the leadership. Are you going to complain about what kids are posting on social media, or are you going to coach them? Because social media is not going away at all. It's a powerful tool. Both the good part and the evil part. So I think the best thing we do is educate them and be there for them. We have a social media content person on our staff that provides content for them in terms of photos and videos. So we try and be involved and assist in that as much as we can.
Coach, I have to ask you. So I watched one of your interviews that you did when you joined UCF and as the assistant head coach there as well. And in the interview, I believe it was one of your first days maybe at UCF, and you said that one of your goals and one of your responsibilities at UCF is to grow the women's game. And now you mentioned growing the women's game within UCF, but then also just nationally, gaining more recognition for women's basketball. That was 12 years ago. As we sit here today, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the game between, and this is a fact, the game between Iowa and LSU in this year's tournament averaged 12.3 million viewers. That is the most watched college basketball game ever across men's and women's. And so when you think back to 12 years ago and you fast forward to where we are today, what's your opinion on how much the women's game has grown?
I honestly can tell you that I envisioned this happening, but I didn't envision it happening during my 10 years as coach. It's happened a lot quicker than I thought it would happen. For us, we sold out of season tickets at LSU before the season started. We played 7 games this year on the road where we either sold out or broke that school's single game attendance record. And there's other teams that say it, obviously South Carolina, Connecticut, Stanford, Iowa. There's finally a respect for the game. I think the game's gotten better. I think a lot of credit goes to the players. I think their ability to play the game faster and better. And again, I'm biased, but I actually thought our women's Final Four this year was better played than the men's Final Four. And the coaches has gotten better, and I think fans have, once they have seen it, what's the Kevin Costner movie, If You Build It, They Will Come. I think women's basketball is a perfect example of that. Now, I think our responsibility now is to make sure that we do the right things to continue to grow. It's one thing to get there. It's another thing to stay there. And I think one of the things the women's game is doing very well now is creating personalities out there from the various teams that fans can relate to, that they want to see. The road game, when we come back out on the floor, there's between 2,000 and 3,000 fans sitting there waiting for pictures and autographs. Coach Mulkey makes sure every one of our players comes back out and stays until we're all done. And that's the way she's growing the game. Gary Blair was the same way like that. So I think there's so many things that are going on that are exciting about our game. And no, I didn't think it would happen this quick, but I did think it would happen.
Yeah, it's funny because when I think back, you mentioned that the women's Final Four is better than the men's, and honestly, I agree. And I know on Twitter it was a big discussion because even on the women's side, I would argue that the brands of the women's players was larger than the men's side of the house in the Final Four. You had Caitlin Clark, you had Angel Reese, and on the men's side, I mean, maybe Zach Edey from Purdue, maybe he was the most well-known player on that side. So I think it's awesome because listen, at the end of the day, I love basketball, whether it be men's, women's, whoever. It's a great sport, and just having these women athletes get the recognition that they deserve, I think ultimately helps everyone and really hurts no one. So it is a win-win for everybody involved.
Well, I think what you also see is these personalities as they move to the WNBA. You've already seen, gosh, there's 2 WNBA teams that have already sold out season tickets. Dallas, I forget who the other one was. Caitlin is at Indiana. I know they play the Mystics, and the Mystics have had to move their game from their facility to where the Wizards play.
Yeah.
Vegas is moving their game. So I think that growth is going to continue. I keep telling people, it reminds me, and I'm old enough, but when Magic and Bird went to the NBA, and how that thing just exploded because of the personality of those players. And then you start noticing a couple other players, and then the game grows. Back in that time, the NBA had a marketing slogan called "One Fan at a Time." And that's how the NBA grew their brand back in those days. And I think women's basketball has kind of done the same thing, but I think you're going to see this help the professional game grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I saw a stat. Caitlin Clark's Indiana jersey was like the #1 most sold jersey across all sports within maybe like a 24 or 48 hour period. I mean, insane. I mean, imagine telling somebody 5 years ago, hey, the #1 selling jersey for this period of time is going to be, a WNBA player. People would look at you and say, you're crazy. I mean, it's remarkable how fast it's grown.
And like I said, I think it's a trajectory that we've been working on for a little bit, and it's just really exploded the last couple of years. The thing I really love about women's basketball now is for the longest time, you were looking at UConn and Tennessee and Stanford. Now, there's so many teams out there that have quality players and quality coaches. You go into a season and you're not sure who's going to win the championship. And I think it's just been good for our sport.
Coach, I have to ask, I know you've been asked this question before, and so I will just preface it with that. But you once coached during your first tenure with LSU when you were still on the men's side. You coached this young gentleman by the name of Shaquille O'Neal, who ended up doing amazing things in the NBA, and who for a very long time I hated because I am a devout Sacramento Kings fan. And obviously, with him being on the Lakers, I have childhood memories of him dominating my Sacramento Kings. And so I did not like Shaq for a while, but obviously since then I've come to respect and like who he is, not only as a basketball player, but as a person. As you know, we as fans have gotten to know his personality a bit more. But you seemingly knew his personality from early on. So I'm curious, what were your impressions of Shaq at LSU?
Well, first of all, he was a phenom. I mean, for a kid that big. Now, when I coached him at LSU, he was tall, but he wasn't as big as he was in the pros. But I remember the very first day of conditioning, we went out on the football field, ran a 100-yard dash, and he beat the guards. I mean, what 7-footer does that? So that part, but he was a guy with a big heart. He was a great teammate. We had another post player on our team at the time that was struggling and coming off the bench, a talented post player, but was just struggling to figure out how to get his game going. Shaquille came in one of our staff meetings and said, Coach, talking to Dale Brown, why don't you start so and so and let me come off the bench? Find me somebody in today's game that will come and tell their coach, Shaquille O'Neal, it's okay, I can come off the bench. Well, Dale was smart enough to figure out a way to play them both. But that's the type of teammate that Shaquille was, and that's sometimes you see the talent of an athlete, but you don't see all these other things. He was a great student. He's a doctor now. His father, Sergeant Harrison, and his mother, Lucille, were very big proponents of education, and Shaquille is a very big proponent of education with his kids now. We talked earlier about Lute Olson saying, I'll let you know in 20 years. Well, look what Shaquille has done post basketball in the business world. And if you ever sit down and talk to him, he's one of these few professional athletes that is 10 toes into all of his business operations. He knows everything that's going on. He's involved. They sign his name over and they use it and they make money or they don't. I mean, he's involved in all of it. And I absolutely love sitting down and talking to him about the business part of it. The other thing, he's very philanthropic. I mean, like I said, he's got a big heart. He helps individuals, he helps organizations, he helps families. I just awful proud of Shaquille and honored that I had a chance to coach him. We stay in touch. He loves LSU. He's back on campus quite a bit. He hasn't forgot where he's came from. He's just a special man.
And I read in an article that him and Angel are also very close. And I believe you had a couple of comments on their friendship. If you could please elaborate.
Well, I connected them. Shaq came into town, and this was before it was public knowledge, but he told me, he said, hey, I'm getting ready to close a deal where I'm going to be, I'm own Reebok. I'm going to be in charge of Reebok. And I'm looking for a female college player that could be one of our spokespeople. And I said, you need to look at Angel. And he said, well, I've been watching her. He said, tell me about her. And I said, she's got a big personality. She's got a big heart, a lot of energy. I think she'd be great. And so they connected, and Reebok signed Angel. And more importantly, Shaquille's been a mentor to Angel, helping her handle some of the things we talked about earlier. Shaquille has obviously went through that. The thing that I really love is because Angel has did such a amazing job with the NIL stuff. I mean, some of the companies that are partnered with her, and Shaquille has lent a lot of his business savvy and business sense and business guidance to her. So I think he really came along at the right time in Angel's life. I know Angel just loves and respects the heck out of him. And I know Shaquille. Shaquille's going to be there. I don't know how long Angel's going to play in the WNBA, 5, 10, 15 years, because she can do a lot of other things. But I know Shaquille will be there for the duration, the rest of her life.
What I'm always so curious when it comes to what drives people and where their motivation comes from. And you mentioned how you love exploring the topic of failure and how coaches deal with failure. Equally, one of my favorite topics to explore is this, topic of motivation and what drives certain individuals. From your experience with Shaq and what you've seen, what do you think drives him?
I think he's competitive. I think he also has an amazing imagination. I think he has a great vision that there are things out there that he hasn't accomplished that he doesn't even know about, and he wants to go out and find them. And along that topic, one of the most important things a coach can do in working with players is to help that player discover, or for the coach to discover, what that player's why is. There's nothing more powerful than a powerful why. When any individual has a why that is just deep in their belly, it's amazing what they can accomplish. That why is going to be different. Not every player plays the game for the love of the game. Not every player. We had an instance where I had a couple of players came back in for kind of a reunion, and I took two of them out to eat. One of them was a guard. One of them was a big, tall post player. The guard was talking about practice and how hard it was and how fun it was and all the great memories. And he loved the charge drills. And I mean, he's just going over, and he looked at the other guy. He said, "What about you?" He said, "Nah." And I said, "So you loved all that stuff because you love basketball." He says, "I played basketball because I had to. It was his way of getting an education." And I remember thinking, I wish I had known that when he had played there. I didn't know he didn't love the game. And if I had been a little bit more in tune to his why, I might have been able to help motivate him a little bit better.
Coach, you seemingly have been very in tune with your why, and it's taken you a far way into your coaching career. And it's taken you so far that I want to read this quote from a particular head coach that you work with now, Kim Mulkey, that you mentioned earlier in this podcast. So Kim, when asked about you, said that you are going to extend her career, and that you are one of the most important hires she's made in her 23 years of being a head coach, and thinks that you deserve to be in the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. How do those words make you feel?
Well, very humbled because I hold Kim in the highest regard. These 2 years, she has given me some of the greatest moments of my coaching career, but it's also been two of the most educational. She is by far the best practice coach I've ever been around. I've learned so much on so many different facets from the game, from recruiting to practice organization to discipline to formulating a team. And I think for her to feel that way about me is certainly very humbling. She's an amazing person. I know a lot of, unless you get to know her, you really don't know her, if that makes sense. But she has long been a predominant person in this game, first as a player, then as assistant coach, then what she did at Baylor. And now she's won a national championship with the second team in only her second year. And she gets the part about making sure your program is built in such a way that affects the community that it's in. Louisiana's her home, so when she left Baylor to come to LSU, she was coming back home. And she did that intentionally. There were some things that needed attention at LSU and at Baton Rouge and in the state, and she thought she could use her platform to get some of those things done, and she has.
Love it. Coach, you are a very humble person, but I want the audience to gain an appreciation for how hard you've worked to get to where you are. And so bear with me here, because I'm going to read a few sentences that speak to your work ethic. And so this was taken out of an article, but it says, for the previous decade, Starkey had operated as if LSU women's basketball would fall apart if he weren't in the office. He worked on holidays and had 8 years worth of vacation days saved up. During the season, on Thursday and Sunday nights after games, he'd sleep in the office because by the time he was done breaking down film, it would be 4 a.m. He figured it was just easier to shower at the gym, nap in his office, and be back at his desk by 6 a.m. to start the next day. You mentioned at the beginning of this interview your father playing a role in establishing that work ethic. Is that where it comes from, or did you have some other motivating factors that drove you to work as hard as you did?
Well, it certainly started with my father. As hard as I work, I still can't compare my work ethic to my father's. I would like to say this: everything you said there was true, but it changed. But my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was God telling me my priorities weren't straight. So I went from just working hard all the time to figuring out a way to work hard and work smart. So instead of staying up all night at the office, I'll bring my laptop at home and spend a little bit of time with my wife, then come here in my home office and watch film. I do vacations now. I think there's part of me that thinks that I had to work that way to get where I came from to get here. So many, when you look at college coaching staff, so many of them played college basketball. I got cut when I was a junior in high school. I wasn't an outstanding basketball player. I just absolutely had to earn my way. So I felt like I had to work like that. If I had to do all over again, I'm not sure I'd do it that way. I think my perspective's a little bit different now because what my wife went through. I will say this, lifelong assistant coach. When I left West Virginia to drive to LSU, I loaded up my Subaru, and my junior high coach, Alan Osborne, told me, be the assistant coach that you would want if you were the head coach. So I do try to live that every day. And I know if I was a head coach, I want my assistant coach to beat me to work. I'd want them to still be there when I left, or when they left, I want them to stop by and say, Coach, you need anything before I leave. I want to be proactive. I want to look for things to do before a head coach tells me. So I used to do that, but not so much anymore.
Oh, yeah. Now you don't have 8 years worth of vacation saved up, so
Still work hard. And you know, I'll say this because I was asked this question at a clinic a couple of years ago. Would you explain balance if you're coaching? And I said, I'll explain it easy. There is none. Don't even think that you're going to balance those scales. But here's what I will tell you. When I'm done coaching for the day, I come home. I don't go to the bar. Don't go hang out with my friends. I come home. You talk about being in the moment. When I'm with my wife, I'm 10 toes in, 10 toes in. And I think that's important. People talk about balance. It's impossible in this game if you want to stay in it. But there is a way. My wife's involved in our program. There's times I'll come home and two of my players will be sitting in the dining room. She'll be cooking. We don't have children, so we invite the team over to decorate our Christmas tree. So I involve her as much as possible. The work has to be done. That's just never going to change. We can come back and do this sucker 100 years from now, and hard work's still going to be one of the prerequisites for staying in it and being successful.
how did you know that coaching was something you wanted to do for the rest of your life? And I ask because amongst other struggles, one of the major struggles that I see with people my age or people even younger than me is figuring out what their passion is. And there's this advice of, well, try a bunch of different things and then, hopefully something sticks. Well, the issue with that advice is that not a lot of people are in a situation to where they can maybe try a bunch of different things. Maybe they have some factors that are limiting their ability to do that. And so I'm curious if you could help explain your own experience and how you knew that coaching was your passion, and hopefully that could maybe shed some light on young people and even myself to, as we're trying to figure out this whole life thing.
Well, I think we started out talking about Alan Osborne and him impacting my life, and me thinking, gosh, I love the game of basketball. What if I could do what Alan does and impact one or two young people along the way he's impacted me? And then again, some you just mentioned it. Some of this is timing. And then I go take the class with Stu Aberdeen. He talks about the impact of people. I worked for Dale Brown, who would always tell you basketball is simply a tool that we use to make changes in young people in our community. To me, things happen as you go through your career to remind you why you do it, because there's going to be a lot of hardship. There's going to be a lot of difficult times. If you do it long enough, you're probably going to get fired. You're going to get demoted. You're going to have a losing season. You're going to be ridiculed in the media, on social media. All these things happen. So there are things that, you go through your career. And for me, the large majority of those are based on the student athletes I coach. I had an incident this year where a young lady invited me to her wedding. One of my former players at Texas A&M, and just a kid I love to death, was actually a walk-on. But we've remained close, and I like to think I've been a small part of her life, and her family's wonderful. Her father had recently passed away, but her wedding happened to fall on a Saturday before we played Kentucky, the last weekend of the year. And we practiced that morning at 9 o'clock. We finished at 11. I went to my office, put on a suit, and drove 5.5 hours to outside of Houston, Texas, and walked in just in time for the wedding. And after the wedding, I went up and I told her how proud I was and happy, everything. And she had a few tears in her eyes and gave me a hug, and I got a note. And then I got back in the car and got back in Baton Rouge about 2 o'clock, and not too long after that, got up and we got ready to play Kentucky. When you get a wedding invitation from one of your former players, I know I picked the right profession. When I get baby pictures, when I get letters, when kids stop by, I have former players that come by and stay at the house for a day or two when they're passing through. Those to me, and I think if you do this for a long period of time, if you do it the right way, those things are the reminders. When you get in it, it's always exciting and fresh, but there's got to be things that happen along the way. And I always tell people this. We have a lot of people getting in the business now because they see the money. They see how much a Kim Mulkey makes, a Gino Auriemma makes, and that's the wrong reason to get in. I'll give you just a quick story. My first college job was on the men's side at West Virginia State College. And the year before I went there, they were 4-22. And a guy named Craig Carson, assistant Jim Boone, who I went to school together, they talked me into joining the staff. And I was paid $6. I got a meal card at the cafeteria and a dorm room. And Nick, I was in hog heaven, man. I was a college coach. Now, we didn't have managers or equipment people or anything like that. So I'm doing laundry, I'm cleaning the floor, and I'm watching film and recruiting, all the things coaches do. And I just thought it was amazing. Our first year, we went 18-10, from 4-22 to 18-10, huge turnaround. And the athletic director called me in the office and said, I'm so sorry. It's an NAIA school. They got budget problems, so we're going to have to shave your salary to $4,000. We can't afford the meal card. And the next year, we won 26 games and finished second in our conference. And the athletic director, Dr. Richard Treadway, bless his heart, that's no longer with us, but he called me and he said, I'm so embarrassed after that year, but I got to cut your salary to $2,000 and we can't afford the dorm. And so I went and packed up my clothes and moved my clothes into the office and lived in the office for that year. We went 31-3. We were national runner-up, lost by 1 point in the national championship game. Later I was coaching on the women's side at Marshall, making $17,000 with the courtesy car. Man, I thought I was Bill Gates. I thought, I'd hit the lotto. And Dale Brown offered me a job for $12,000. I would move back into the dorm. It was never about the money for me early. And I'm not saying money's not important. Raise your family, there's retirement. But I think early on, the best advice I give for a young coach is go work for somebody that will make you better. Don't worry about any of the other things. Work for somebody that you can learn from, that will hold you accountable, that will give you things to do. And the other thing is, in over 40 years of coaching, I have only applied for one job, and I did not get that job. I applied for it and did not get it. Every other job I got, somebody came and asked, would you be willing to take a look at this job? We'd like to hire you. So your work is your best resume. And it worries me because, like I said, we have, not all, but we have quite a lot of young people who are taking jobs for money and changing jobs left and right and all, and they're missing out on the opportunity to learn the craft.
Word of mouth is the best advertisement.
100%. Absolutely.
That's what I think of. And not related, but maybe somewhat related, I also think of Tesla and how they, didn't run any ads. They were just focused on putting out a great product and relied on word of mouth. And people would see it on the street, or people would talk to an owner of a Tesla and say, hey, how do you like that Tesla, by the way? Oh, amazing. Best car I've ever driven. I mean, what better ad than that for your product? And likewise, for you, Coach, the people that you work with, right? Word spreads. Hey, what do you think of that, Coach Bob Starkey? What is he like? Amazing person, amazing coach, wealth of knowledge. I mean, that's better than, like you mentioned, than any resume you could ever have.
Well, and there's so many. There's a couple of. I wrote a book called The Art of Being an Assistant Coach about, 30 years ago, and it was a good book not because I wrote it, but I sent out surveys to over 100 coaches. Some of them were football coaches, some of them were baseball coaches. 80% of them were basketball coaches, like John Wood, Pat Summitt, Gino Auriemma. I could go on and on and on, and I gave them a list of characteristics and asked them to rank them. There were like 15 characteristics. I asked them to rank them 1 through 3. But the top 3. The number one by far was loyalty. Number 2 was work ethic. Now these surveys are coming in. I'm feeling pretty good. They're not saying intelligence, ability to recruit. Listen, I can be loyal and I can work hard. By the way, one of the unique questions in the survey was, I asked them to list one characteristic they wanted an assistant coach that I had left off. Overwhelmingly, it was initiative. They wanted people that could see things that needed to be done, and they would do them without having to be told. So I think if you're loyal, you work hard, you have initiative, people will know about you.
I love it. Coach, as you look back on your own career, 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up this episode. First question, as you look back on your own career, is there a particular moment that you think back to and say, Dang, I'm really proud of myself in that moment.
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know if there is one particular one that stands out. There was a year at LSU where we had, it's when I was working for Coach Gunner, we had 5 season-ending injuries, and we played 80% of the season with 6 scholarship players. And we found a way to finish fourth in the SEC, go to the NCAA tournament, win a game. We actually became the first team to ever beat Pat Summit that wasn't ranked. That was 2 years before we went to our first Final Four. I had a one year stint at Auburn with Johnny Harris. The year before we got there, they'd won 4 games, went 0-16 in the league. And in one short year, we won 10 games and won some SEC games, beat 3 ranked teams, including number 5 Tennessee. So I guess sometimes those years where not much is expected and you squeeze a little bit more than most people thought, those kind of stand out.
Fantastic. Coach, last question for you here. And listen, I know you're humble. I know maybe this will be difficult for you, but I am pleading that you brag at least a little bit about this blog that you have and what inspired you to create it and what type of information is contained within it. And then maybe if you have a couple of favorite articles that you've written or favorite stories that are on that blog. I mean, I mentioned to you before we started recording, I stumbled across this blog of yours, and it's like, I was joking around saying I expected there to maybe be, 50 posts in there, and I could just quickly skim through it, maybe pick up a couple, quick things I could include in this podcast. But when I navigated to the homepage and saw on the side there where you had all the categories and all the, names listed, I mean, there has to be at least, 1,000 articles in there. So please, I'm begging you to brag a little bit about this blog. What inspired you to write it? And then maybe a couple favorite articles or stories that you've written about.
Well, the inspiration for it was Don Meyer. If you ever went to a Don Meyer coaching academy or one of his free clinics, he just had tons of free stuff set out. And anytime you got a note from Don, there'd be 2 or 3 pass outs in there, whether it was motivational or X and O's or leadership. And he would just, his thing was to share as much basketball. That was how he thought we grew the game. We grow the game by making coaches better. How do we make coaches better? By making information available. The free clinic he put on, still one of the best things I've ever been to. So, I wasn't going to get 500 coaches to come watch me at a clinic, but I thought I could start a blog. And I think the blog's excellent, not because I write it, but because I share thoughts and ideas from other people. I think, and it's been a while since I've been on it. It's been a while. There's over 3 posts on there. What I like about it for somebody who wanted to get on it, if you scroll to the side, there's categories. If you want to look for special situations, if you want to look for transition defense, if you want to look for leadership, if you want to look for culture, individual coaches, Pete Newell, Bob Knight, Pat Summit, all these categories. So if you don't want to scroll through 3,000 articles, but you're looking for something right there on that right-hand column, it's all lined up in alphabetical, and you can click on there and you'll find something useful, not because it came from me, because I just did the work and got stuff from other people, whether it was me attending clinics, whether it was books I read or information that was shared to me by other coaches. And I do really believe the best way we grow this game is to share. Real quick, one of my absolute favorite stories. Bob Knight and Dean Smith sitting at a summer event, a recruiting event, and probably weren't paying attention to the game, but they're sitting beside each other, and they're talking about offense. And Dean looks at Knight and says, I wish I could get our teams to screen like you guys do. Your angles are so good. The timing is so good. Your actions coming off and Knight started laughing. That's funny because our staff was talking about, we wish we could cut like you guys. You guys have great spacing. You cut with a purpose. You know how to find the cutter. And so they're sitting there, they start laughing. Knight says, what you need to do? You just need to come on up to Bloomington, and let's hole up in the film room for about 2 days, and we'll help each other out. And Dean said, I would love that. He said, well, we can't do it this year. And Knight said, why? So well, we play each other. I said, I don't care. Come on up. Let's talk basketball. And that's, there's no secrets. We need to, as coaches, we need to help each other grow. And that's kind of where that inspiration comes. Don Meyer has did more to grow this game than any other singular coach that's ever coached. He's helped junior high coaches, high school coaches, college coaches, pro coaches on the men's side, on the women's side. His legacy it's unparalleled and unmatched, and I'm a beneficiary of it. I mean, for some reason, he saw something in me, and he shares so much with me over the years. And I used to spend so many times up in his house. We could sit here and do another hour on Don, but I'm going to give you one that I think is important for coaches. I was sitting up in his den one year when he lived in Nashville, and he had his big notebook out, and he would go through a few pages every now and then. He'd tear something out, throw it away. And I was like, Coach, what are you doing? He said, well, that was a drill that we don't need to do anymore. That's a play we don't need anymore. And my thing is, we spend all our time in the summer looking to add to our programs when sometimes the best thing we could do is to delete. And, Don used to say, the thing that makes a masterpiece is what the artist leaves out. And I think sometimes we get too complex and we want to do too much and add too much. Well, that's just one of those little, that's a blog post somewhere on the blog. I thought that was a great story.
So I actually want to pull on that thread a little bit, because you bring up a point that I was thinking about as well, which is we live in a time where information is everywhere. I mean, there's never been an easier time if you want to know what the weather is going to be in New York tomorrow, all it takes is a couple seconds, right? Do you think that there's sometimes, and you can look at it from a coach's perspective, do you think that there's ever too much information? Like, is there almost a point to where we get to information overload and we don't know how to parse through all this information that's being thrown at us, and what's good and what actually fits within our scheme, and what's good for the team? I guess your thoughts on that.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with that more. I think, again, Don Meyer would say, when you go to a clinic, write down all the ideas, but know when you come back, you can't use them all. I write down everything. I still go to clinics. I read, I watch videos. I write it all down, but I don't use them all. I think it's good to have that information, especially when I'm scouting or trying to break down another opponent. But I think it is specifically important, the point that you made in regards to what we give the players. I mean, we have totally changed the way we disseminate scouting information to our players. We used to give like 8, 9, 10-page scouting reports. Now they're down to 3.5 pages. They're bullet points. They're not in paragraphs. We try and do some things with visualization in terms of how we give information. But you can, Rick Majerus, the more you think, the slower your feet get. And I think that's really true. One other good story that we're talking about with modern coaches now, Tim Elmore. I don't know if you're familiar with Tim. He's an educator in Georgia and is the leading expert on the past few generations about how they're wired and how they absorb information, and what motivates them, and what doesn't motivate them. And he told a story once that when man first came to be, they learned to go down and cup their hands at the lake and scoop water up. And then they figured out how to carve out a piece of wood and scoop water up, then how to lower a bucket, down into a well. And then we invented plumbing, and now we got bottled water now, for Christ's sake. And his point is, water hasn't changed in 1,000 years, but how we package it has. And that's one of the singular most important concepts in teaching right now. It hasn't changed. The fundamentals are the same. You got to play in a stance. You got to handle the ball without mistakes. You got to go the boards. You got to pass. You got to shoot. But how we package it to kids has to be different. And I would add to that, we go to the store and buy bottled water. There's like 30 options. Well, I think how the bottled water represents your players. It used to be one size fits all when you were motivating your team, or when you were trying to inspire your team, or when you're trying to teach your team. Well, kids receive information differently. I need to know, is somebody a visual learner? Is they an audio learner? Is they a physical learner? They have to go through it. And I think that's really, really important part of teaching is how you're packaging it, and understanding the customer, your student athlete, your customer. What product do they want? How do they want to receive it? And I think when you can start clicking on that, you can start teaching. But I know we kind of got away from your point. You still can't give them too much. You got to give them things that are relevant. And it's like shooting. I talked to Jim Foster one time on shooting, and he said a major mistake that programs make with working with a kid that's a bad shooter is they have different people working with them, and each person, one person said elbow, one follow through, one you know. He said when he was the only person who was allowed to work with the shooter in his program was him, and when he worked with the shooter, he would work on one thing. One thing. We're going to work on your elbow. That's all we're working on. Because if you got them thinking about too many things, they're not going to be thinking about anything. We talk
Right.
about helping players be present. Don't give them too much to think about.
It's funny you mentioned Tim Elmore because somewhere in that bookshelf is his book. The exact title is new. Is it a new kind of diversity or a new type of diversity? I think one of his most recent books that I read about a year ago. That was a great read. So very familiar with Tim's work, and
Amazing.
absolutely amazing. I highly suggest for those watching or listening to this to go stop the video, come back later, but stop the video and go look up some of Tim's work.
Nick, just real quick, they can
Yeah.
Google him, go to his website, and he has a free email. You can
Hmm.
see a lot of his writings on there. He's got a little blog, but he's got this email where he shoots out some amazing information in terms of teaching and motivating, inspiring, and understanding this generation. You know, Buzz Williams says all the time, "Don't be that coach that complains about this generation." Because by the way, back when you played, there was some coach that complained about your generation. So
Right.
Elmore's really got it down. You know, the book that turned it on for me had one called The IY Generation, and he since wrote several books like the one you mentioned. But and I think that's important for coaches. You know, sometimes the things we need to learn aren't from other coaches. Sometimes there's a lot of other fields that we can learn from to make us better at our jobs.
Coach, as we wrap up this conversation, I figured a good place for us to end is as you look back throughout your career, obviously more than 25 years experience, more than that, actually, way more than 35 years, right? Total experience coaching. You've seen and come across a bunch of different athletes, a bunch of different play styles, a bunch of different games, scenarios, all of the above. I'm curious, as you look back, what has changed about the game of basketball and what has remained the same?
Well, I think the importance of playing the game the right way will never change. The fundamental style of basketball, the ability to pass, to dribble, to shoot, the determination to defend and go to the boards. Now, within that, you know, things change. Like we're so much more of a ball screen game now than say we were 10 years ago when we were passing and cutting. It always goes to man, and then there'll be a period of time where a lot of people are playing zone and matchup, and then it goes back to man. You know, we've been pressure man, pack line, but still comes down to those fundamentals. The biggest change is the outside part, the social media, the distractions, the people that have access. And I'm just talking about my level, obviously collegiate level. The people that have access to your players. You know, we have all our players have agents. Some of them have marketing communications teams, and we have to communicate with all these people. But to me, social media has been a powerful thing that has been good, but certainly has been a distraction. It's the outside stuff. That's what's really changed about coaching. That you want to know what fatigues coaches? Us having to do these things. We're wired to coach and to teach and help them with academics and help them through family crisis and all those things. But there's been so much change. You know, we were talking about before we came on the air. The last 3 or 4 years have been just absolutely warp speed with Titanic size changes, and we're learning on the run. And it'll be interesting to see where we're at in about another 5, 10 years.
Coach, I lied to you. One last question, and this is a selfish one, just because I'm such a big NBA fan. If you could either go back in time or even present day, if you could coach one player, who would it be?
Wow, that's a heck of a question right there.
That's the only way we have to end this. It's the right way to
Yeah.
end it.
You know, I grew up in the '70s. My first basketball team I fell in love with were the Knicks. They were coached by Red Holzman. They had a backcourt of Walt Frazier and Earl Monroe, DeBusschere and Bradley, Willis Reed at the post. I'm from West Virginia, so obviously, you know, Jerry West was such a prominent part of my childhood. Got to go Jordan, and not so much for me coaching him, but just how much I could learn from him. I think it's a challenge to coach And again, we could do a whole nother hour. I think there is an art and a science to coaching superstars. I've actually did a couple of clinics on that topic because they're different, and then they have to be treated as such, and you have to know that. But I think it would be fascinating to there's so many stories about Jordan. There's the one where when he first started playing, and Doug Collins was the coach. Doug would finish every practice with a scrimmage to 11, and Jordan would be on the red team, and the red team would get up like 8-3, and Collins would tell Jordan to turn white. Of course, it'd piss him off, but then Jordan would come back and said 80% of the time the white team would come back and win. There was a time when Jordan came out of retirement. He went to baseball and played for a year, and he came back in his very first practice with Chicago. They have a great practice. And Phil Jackson calls him in the circle and says, "Hey, guys, great job. Let's come back and do it again tomorrow." And the Bulls start walking to the locker room, and Jordan walks to the other end, starts running wind sprints by himself. And then, of course, what does his teammates do? Michael Jordan needs to run wind sprints. So they come back and they run wind. I don't know about coaching him, but it would have been awesome just to watch him for a year. And like you and I talked, not just the games, but practice. And, he's such a competitive guy. They said when he was a rookie. This was back before charter planes, and they would be in the airport, and they'd have these video games. That was back when Pac-Man was big. And his rookie year, he'd get his butt beat by the veterans in Pac-Man. They said his second year, he had a Christmas party at his home, and Scottie Pippen accidentally walked into a room, and there was a Pac-Man game. I mean, that's how that dude's wired. He was going to figure out how to beat you in Pac-Man. I mean, that's a different kind of dude right there. But it have been fascinating to watch him in team meetings and when he had individual meetings with Phil, and just I think it'd be fascinating.
One of the things I think of, you reminded me because you mentioned the Pac-Man game, is when they asked MJ about his gambling problem. He said, "I don't have a gambling problem. I have a competitiveness problem."
Hey, it's true. Here's one of my favorite Jordan stories I heard. Charter plane, they land. Guys start filing off. Jordan lays back, tells the flight attendant, "Do you have any control over which bag comes off on the conveyor belt first?" And she said, "Well, I'm sure I can arrange something. What do you need?" She said, "Well, we have all these big black bags, and they have our numbers. And I need bag number 23 to come off that conveyor belt first." And she said, "Well, I think I can take care of him." Jordan rolls out a few $100s and gives it to her, says, "Here, you take care of it." So, they're all you know how you do, you stand around the conveyor belt. You're just sitting there, you're just talking and thinking. And Jordan says, "What the heck? I got $1,000. Mine's the first one to come off." Well, you know how pro players, so they all throw $1,000 on there. Boom, here comes 23 off the conveyor belt. So I tell that story because Jordan's going to find a way to beat you. If you find a player that, like you said, is so competitive, he's going to find a way to beat you. But he was wired like that for everything.
That's incredible. That is now my favorite Jordan story. It used to be I don't have a gambling problem, I have a competitiveness problem, but that has now overtaken.
Well, they're the same story when you think about it.
Yeah, they are, right. A lot of similarities. Coach, since we're on the topic, I figured one last question. I keep saying I've said one last question for the last 3 questions here, but from a coach's perspective, you're talking about the great book, fantastic book, and for me it was interesting because I never knew a lot about Phil. I would always, obviously see him on the sidelines, and to me he was, oh yeah, he's the coach that coached MJ and Kobe. That's just how he was ingrained in my brain. But your perspective of Phil and the job that he did with MJ and Kobe.
Sure. Well, by the way, Phil was on that New York Knicks team I talked about in the
Right.
late 60s, early 70s, coming off the bench.
Right.
I think Phil's a great example of a coach that knows how to coach individuals. And I think that's incredibly important in the pro game, and it's starting to become more important in the college game. Jordan was wired different than Pippen. Pippen wired different than Kerr. Kerr different than Rodman. I mean, he had a lot of different personalities there that he had to mesh together. Same thing, with Shaq and Kobe and some of the players on those teams. People always, if you hear a Phil Jackson hater, they say, "Well, I could have won with those guys." No, you have no idea how hard it is to keep a team like that unified, not for 1 year, but the entire time he's with Chicago, they're consistently the best. And then same thing at Los Angeles. So I think his ability to handle personalities but at the same time, be a really, really good basketball coach. NBA TV used to do this thing where they would have live cameras at the NBA training camp. And I'll never forget tuning in and watching the Lakers, and there was Phil, and he had his team, including Kobe, doing two-line chest passes. And he's walking through there talking about the follow-through, the thumbs down, step to the pass. Man, I popped the VHS tape in there so fast, I got to show my kid, listen, if the Lakers and Kobe are doing this drill, then there must be something to it. But I don't think he gets enough credit, as crazy as that sounds, because a lot of people say, well, I could have won. Look at all the talent he had. But it's hard meshing egos and personalities for, with the playoffs close to 100 games. And he did it in two different organizations. And then, like I said, the triple post offense. I mean, they ran better offense. Their execution level. It's not like he just turned Mike loose and Pippen loose. I mean, they were very well coached. And he's a unique guy. One of the things that I like that he does that I do is we have our team read books. He was big at, Shaq told me he would read a book and give to Shaquille. So I read this book. I think this would relate to you. Read this and then let's talk about it. I mean, that's different, especially on the pro level. Now, I don't, turn the lights out, meditating. That's above where anything I've ever been. I just think he was a special coach. I mean, to do what he did.
Right. And honestly, as the years go by, I only gain more and more respect for the job that he did. And much to the points that you just brought up. But I even think, present day NBA, I think of an Eric Spoelstra, right? One of the most respected coaches in today's league, but also somebody who had to deal with LeBron, D Wade, and Bosh on the same team. Three big personalities and three very talented players. And you look at examples like that, and again, people might say, well, of course the Heat won. They had LeBron, D Wade, and Bosh. And of course Spoelstra did well. He had all those players. But you look at so many different examples of coaches who had equal or better talent on their team, but flamed out. I look at the Suns this year, KD, Beal, and Booker, and they swept. They got swept. They didn't win a single playoff game. So it's not always, listen, people can say what they want. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but I think you and I can agree that it's not just talent, and it takes a specific type of coach to make things work.
And Eric's been outstanding. I mean, even after those guys left. How about, give Pat Riley credit. If Eric's in another organization, he's probably been fired 2 or 3 times. That's the other part of our job. We talk about what to make a change, and the most important thing is the impact we have on communities and kids. But we have to win. I'll tell you about a coach. Okay, there was this school. It was a basketball school, basketball college. It was known for its basketball, and they needed a coach. So the AD goes out and hires a low major guy that nobody's heard of. He comes in, he has 3 straight losing seasons. At the end of his 3rd season, the last regular season game, he loses to his in-state rival by about 30. Then he goes to the conference tournament, and he loses by about 35 in the first game. You know what happened to him on Monday? He got a contract extension.
Oh, wow. Oh.
Tom Butters was the AD and was smart enough to see that Mike was building the program the right way, and he just needed time. And that was Krzyzewski's first 3 years at Duke. And Butters, I mean, you talk about the dogs on your tail. I mean, the letters, boosters withdrawing money, and he took a lot of heat. And I'll tell you how I knew that story. Krzyzewski told the story at a Nike clinic in Tunica, Mississippi. And his point is there's a lot of Mike Krzyzewskis out there that we'll never know about because they weren't given an opportunity to build the right way. And that's the other part of our game now. We're in a microwave society. People want you to win, and they want you to win now. And when you don't, they're ready to, they try a different flavor.
Wow. What a powerful story, and what a perfect ending to this podcast. Coach Bob, I cannot thank you enough for your time. But before I let you go and before we end this, there is a little tradition that we do here on the Victory Degree podcast, and that involves life advice. And so I ask each of my guests to leave a piece of advice for the following guest. But the catch is that you do not know who the next guest is going to be. And so our previous guest on this podcast was a young lady by the name of Sylvia Hoffman. And Sylvia is an Olympic bobsledder who won bronze at the 2022 Olympic Games and is getting ready to compete in the next Winter Olympic Games. And her advice for you, again, not knowing who you were going to be, is believe in yourself. If you believe in yourself, nothing is impossible. And so as part of this tradition, I ask for your feedback on that piece of advice and then the piece of advice that you would like to leave for our next guest.
Well, the advice left for me was outstanding. You got to be your biggest cheerleader without question. There's nothing more important for an individual than self-talk. And sometimes we listen too much and we don't talk enough to ourselves. The messages we give to ourselves on a daily basis make a huge difference. I think that's great advice. For me, over the last 5 or 6 years, thanks to Buzz Williams, I was able to connect with Ryan Holiday and heard him speak to the Texas A&M team. And now I read everything he writes. He's into Stoicism. And, the basis of Stoicism is to take a look at your mortality, memento mori, that we all must die. And it's one of the best things I've ever took as a personal philosophy. And from that, the most important thing to me is today matters. Today matters because yesterday's gone and we don't know if we have tomorrow. Everything you got, give it to today. And then you get up tomorrow morning and you do the same thing, almost process oriented. I hope Coach Saban would be proud of that.
Coach Bob, thank you so much for your time and coming on the podcast. This has been amazing. I mean, we could talk, honestly, I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but I know you have other obligations and I'm sure you want to go spend some time with your wife. And so I thank you again for coming on the podcast and I thank you for your time. And by the way, all of Coach Bob's links will be in the description. I highly recommend you go follow him on Twitter and Instagram. He consistently puts out great content. And then the blog, the world-renowned blog will be linked in the description as well. And I implore you, I command you that if you're listening to this, if you made it this far, that you go check out the blog because, I mean, you could spend days, just looking through and finding bits of information and inspiration from all the information that Coach Bob put together. So, Coach, thank you again for your time. This has been amazing.
Thanks for having me, Nick. I had a blast.
Awesome. I'm sure we'll stay in touch. Until next time.